First, my disclosure. Now, as Gordon said, I have taken the opportunity of these 4 years to travel a lot around all the continents and many, many countries, and I have seen systematically the same thing, which is, well, when you discuss with politicians, with Ministry of Health, like yesterday, we had the honor that the Ministry of Health of Czech Republic came for the opening ceremony. Politicians acknowledge, and sincerely, even if we have to be careful about sincerity of politicians, but this is another story, sincerely about that child and adolescent mental health is a priority. Okay, but at the same time, when you look at figures, in many countries, in particular in rich countries, which is very curious, investment in child and adolescent psychiatry is stable and sometimes decreased recently. And so I think there is here a real problem, like as if there was some break between the needs that are considered by the society and what the society does for child and adolescent psychiatry. And I think we have to think about it, to think about this break, to try to propose solution. And you could say, of course, there has been problem with psychiatry since the beginning of psychiatry. You know, there is anti-psychiatry, and especially in child and adolescent psychiatry, many people consider that this is only a fantasy of a child and adolescent psychiatrist, that child cannot have mental disorder because they are so pure, that ADHD is an invention, that depression does not exist because kids are happy, basically. And in addition, in child and adolescent psychiatry, most of our treatments are related in a way to care. You know, psychotherapies are some kind of very sophisticated type of care. And for many politicians, for many societies, you know that there is a curse of care. Care is considered to belong to women, to the family, and even to the religion, and that it should cost nothing. Okay, so we know that it exists for many times, but I do believe that at the moment there is something new, and perhaps we don't realize it. And this thing new is that child and adolescent psychiatry is a collateral victim of the emergence and spreading of mental health. And you know, you have noticed that everybody speaks of mental health everywhere. You have to be in a good mental health. We have to be happy and positive. And because of that, psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry has dissolved in the spreading of mental health. And we have to explain that, how it happens that everybody now is speaking about mental health. There are, in my opinion, 2 points that are in synergy and that can explain this new thing. The first one, which is obvious, this is so obvious that most often we forget it. Our societies experience major change. The internet, of course, individualism, low birth rate, economic competition and unemployment, and I don't mean that these things are bad. The internet is extraordinary for the youth. You know, you can have an access to knowledge that we had never, and in many places on the world, people, young people that have difficulties to have books, to go to the university, they can have an access to knowledge with their smartphone. So this is something incredibly important for the advancement of societies. And like individualism, many people say this is not good, but a good side effect of individualism is that our society now are obliged to accept people that are different. And you know that in our job we have to deal with this problem every day. And like the low birth rate, this is not good for the pensions, but for the woman, it is very likely to be good. Of course, economic competition and unemployment, this is not so fine. But, okay, we have change, big change. They can be good, but they can be also not so good. And you will all agree, and I have seen that a lot, that individualism has put pressure on societies because there is no more when the individual become more important in society, the society is less strong. And when the individual is more important, the structure of family change. And you know that the family is a very important thing for the development of the children. And this is exactly the same with the internet. I am sure you have noticed in your consultation that there is a generation gap, very important in the use of internet. This is not an anecdote. This is not a minor point. This is a major issue. And also the fact that there is an economic competition, a scare for unemployment, there is a pressure that is put on the family and the society to produce and to produce and to produce even more, and this has an impact on young people. There is a pressure of family and of societies on young people, and for instance, there is a school pressure now in most countries that didn't exist 30 years ago. Okay, so this is the first point. And in addition to that, there are data. And there are data today that say, and this is the burden of mental disorder in child and adolescents. These are the very last figure provided by WHO. These are the figure of 2016 published in April 2018. So the analyses are not very robust, but the main point is here is that you can see that in rich country, mental disorder are in the first rank when you consider the burden of mental disorder in the age 5 to 14. And you can see that when the income of a country increase, the ranking of mental disorder increase. And so, because hopefully the income of our low and middle income countries at the moment will increase, in 5, 10, 20 years, everybody knows that mental disorder will be all over the planet in the first rank, considering the burden of disorder in the age 5 to 14. And in addition, we have epidemiological data. In the best epidemiological study, the NCS adolescent study, we have a figure that is completely amazing. 50% of adolescents will have a mental disorder during their adolescence. And so, because there is a pressure on children and adolescents, because society change, because we have data like that, we are completely scary about the future of our youth. While in fact, perhaps we shouldn't that much. We shouldn't that much because if mental disorder are in the first rank here, this is because the other disorders have decreased. The weight of mental disorder has not increased. It is the weight of the other disorders that has decreased. And even, for instance, we are in Europe here, and in Europe, the burden of mental disorder in the last 15 years has slowly decreased in youth. And this figure is not so simple to interpret because these are epidemiological prevalence, not clinical prevalence. And I think we all have to remember a wonderful paper of Spitzer in 1998. Spitzer was an amazing adult psychiatrist who was at the origin of the first real DSM, and he wrote a paper where it was diagnosis and need for treatment are not the same, which was in fact epidemiological diagnosis and need for treatment are not the same. When you see this figure in paper, this does not mean that they are potential patients. These are youth with criteria for a so-called mental disorder. And so, of course, there are problems with mental disorders in adolescents and children. But this is not a complete crisis, as everybody say too frequently. Anyway, this is the subjective feeling that many people have. There is a crisis, there is a pressure because of the change of societies on our youth, and they are all becoming crazy. The second point is that since the second part of the 20th century, there is now a right to well-being, and this is a major change. This is a major change that is not completely understood. Some people say that it was just after the Second World War, and that our societies were very sad and they wanted to promote well-being. This is an explanation. The second explanation is that it could be the second step of modernity. The first step being at the end of the 18th century, and society had to become mature, and the second step of modernity is to include well-being. And indeed, if you read the Declaration of Human Rights, you see that everyone has a right to well-being. Even if on a philosophical point of view, this is more or less crazy, you know. How can you say that you have the right to well-being? Nobody knows exactly what is well-being, and to be well-being every time, all the time, this is completely boring and exhausting. But anyway, this is not the problem. The problem is sociological. At this moment, the United Nations propose that everybody should have the right to well-being, and health. You know that the definition of health at this moment became well-being, and mental health also is well-being. And so there is a right to well-being, and in addition, it is as if there was an injunction to well-being, as I told you at the beginning of the conference. We have to be in a state of well-being. If you are not, this is suspicious. Anyway, that's life, that's life, that's life. Our society are like that, but we have just to be aware of this. What is the impact of that? The impact is that on one side, there is a pressure on young people that makes that we are scary about their future, and on the other side, there is an injunction of well-being. And so the both are making a huge conflict. And what is the consequence of this conflict? That we don't know how to manage them. And in practice, there is a rush on child and adolescent mental health promotion, and everybody does it. Politician, parent, grandparent, sibling, neighbor, teacher, sport trainers, coach, educator, social worker, policeman, judge, priest, psychologist, and of course, child and adolescent psychiatrist. And in my research department, we do research in public health, in child and adolescent psychiatry, in adult psychiatry, in AIDS, cancer, etc. And who is the more present on the TV and the radio? Them. I too. And much more than our colleagues who work on AIDS or cancer, which are major public health issues also. But it is incredible to see how much the media, the society, want to hear us about the future of our youth. And so, my hypothesis is that there has been a dissolution of child and adolescent psychiatry in mental health, because when you are everywhere, you have in fact disappeared, you are nowhere. When you are everywhere, you do not exist anymore. And this is even more true that if you consider these three equations, child and adolescent have a right to good mental health, which is true. But mental health, what it is in the mind of many people, this is psychiatry, and even us, many times we use the words mental health instead of psychiatry. But in the mind of people, psychiatrists, they give pills, and most often they are right. And psychiatrists, they are physicians, they require a lot of money. And so, if child and adolescents have a right to mental health, if mental health is psychiatry, if psychiatry is pills and money, then we will have everybody, every kid will have a pill, and every kid will have to go and to meet a physician that costs a lot. So this is not possible. This is not possible. So what is the solution? The solution is to forget psychiatry, because it costs and it gives pills. And if you add a long history of anti-psychiatry or course of care, etc., there is a risk at the moment that psychiatry more or less disappear from the field of medicine. Okay, so we have to do something against that. There are simple things. First, we have to be clear. We have to recognize that, okay, our society do change. This is true. We are scared about the future of our youth. This is true. They have a right for a good mental health. Why not? Okay. But this is not related to child and adolescent psychiatry. First, for ethical reason. For ethical reason, because in most countries, perhaps in all countries, physicians have a kind of authority. In particular, psychiatrists, they can lock people. But even behind that, a physician can say to somebody, you are doing bad with your life, you are drinking alcohol too much, this is not good for you. Very few professions can do that with authority. And this authority, we can use it for medicine, not for political priority, which is mental health. And if we use our medical authority in child and adolescent psychiatry to propose change for a society, I am not sure that this is ethical. Of course, we shouldn't do that for economical reasons, because this is not sustainable. Everybody knows that. If 50% of adolescents have a so-called mental disorder, this is not possible. I estimated that in my country, if this figure were true, all psychotherapists should deal only with adolescents. No more with adults, with babies, with infants, with children, only with adolescents. This is a nonsense. And to protect our patients, because if money comes to mental health and disappears from psychiatry, we will have no money to treat our patients. And of course, the problem is a little bit more complex, because this is true for psychiatry, but in IACAPAP we are psychiatry and allied profession, and we are not confronted with exactly the same situation. Indeed, psychologists, for instance, and we will see that after, are in a different position as concerns the question of mental health and psychiatry. We should also acknowledge that we have not to save all youth in need of care and protection. This is a touching side effect of being a child and adolescent psychiatrist or psychologist or nurse or social worker. We do this job because we want to help kids. And so we want to help all kids, all youth. Many of them need some care. But if we do that, politicians and society see that, and they are scared that we want to deal with everybody. Because keep in mind that psychiatrists are physicians, and in mind that for society we give pills. And so they are scary, they are afraid that there could be pills given to all the kids, and when you look at the figures in many countries, the level of prescription increase with time, sometimes dangerously. And we are also guilty in a part of that. We are shy to consider that, like in the other part of medicine, child and adolescent have mental disease. We say disorders, as if disease was difficult to pronounce. But I'm sure you will say, yes, but a disease, this is a syndrome that has an etiology, and in child and in psychiatry we have no etiology, we have no cause, we don't know at the moment. This is completely false. This is completely false. Do you know what is the etiology of acute leukemia, of psoriasis? There is no etiology of acute leukemia. We don't know why. This is bad luck. And do you say that leukemia is a disorder? No, it is a disease. Psoriasis is a disease. Anorexia nervosa is a disease. Schizophrenia is a disease. And even the prognosis of a young woman hospitalized for anorexia nervosa is the same as the prognosis of a young woman hospitalized for a Hodgkin disease. So these are real diseases. We have to say it. Because if we don't say it, politicians will not consider that our patients are real patients. Okay, but more precisely, what is the problem? Well, it is not necessarily a problem, it is a situation. On one side, we have to consider that there is mental health, and that's it, which concerns cognitive and emotional development, which concerns the general population. Everywhere is concerned by mental health. And so the institution, on a sociological point of view, the institution related to mental health are family, school, society. What are the objectives? Well-being, self-actualization, cognitive assessment, tolerant society. Everybody is involved, teacher, training, parenting support, etc. And what are the research related to mental health? Political studies, philosophy, of course. Concerning well-being, there is a philosophy of well-being, very interesting to read. You are very humble after having read that. And from where comes the money of mental health? From the taxes, because this is policy. On the other side, when you see psychiatry, when are you a psychiatric patient? When there is a rupture in your life, a phenomenological rupture. Helmut, yesterday, during his talk, mentioned the work of a German phenomenologist, Edmund Husserl, and this is in this way you have to consider phenomenology. This is, you can be sad. It happens. It happens for every human being in life. But if you lose someone that you loved a lot, you are not only sad, you are extremely sad. There is a rupture in your life. Well, it will happen, and there is a social ritual to deal with that, and that's life. But it is very, very painful. Sometimes you need 6 months to recover with that. For medical reasons, you can observe exactly the same thing, and this is called a depression. A depression, it is a rupture in your existence according to your emotions, according to sadness, irritability, etc. There is a phenomenological rupture that makes you require some needs for a professional. Of course, this is not the only point. We deal also with complication, relapse prevention, etc. But what are the institutions of psychiatry? Medicine, hospital, private practice. What are the objectives? It is not well-being, self-actualization. The objective is curing people, dealing with symptoms. This is what we do mainly. Who works? Most often physician, and of course a team. But the team, there is a hierarchy, and it raises some problem in psychiatric departments, this hierarchy. But it exists. Why does it exist? Because in medicine, in intensive care unit, there need to be hierarchy. If there is a heart attack, somebody has to say, do that, do that, do that, and people have to obey. This is the medical culture, and this is the culture we have in psychiatry, for the best and the worst. We all know that. But if I say that it is in mental health, this is completely different, of course, completely different. And what is presently the research in psychiatry, for the best and the worst? Hard science, biology, statistics, and from where comes the money? From health insurance. So you see, on a sociological point of view, these two areas are very different. The new point is that now there is a gray zone that is becoming more and more important in most of our societies, and we do not know exactly what is this gray zone. And this is not only a question of psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry. For obesity, for type 2 diabetes, this is exactly the same thing. More, in other words, for chronic disease. We have the question of chronic disease, of subthreshold problem, of disability. The concept of disability is rather recent in the history of medicine. And you will see that this gray zone is not related to mental health really, and is not related to psychiatry neither. The institutions it depends on country. In country you have special educations. In other country you have social affairs, medico-social affairs, rehabilitation. And sometimes independent psychologists deal with this issue. What are the objectives? Functioning, inclusion, empowerment, recovery. You see, this is not exactly well-being on one side and treating symptoms on the other side. What is the work mode? A team. This is a collaborative approach without hierarchy. In this gray zone, physicians are not supposed to be the boss. This is reality, and this raises some tension. We have to be honest with that. Research is different also. You have research in social and human science, nursing studies, very important in this area, psychological studies, and money comes from, at the moment, we don't know. Money comes from either from taxes or from the health insurance. Okay, we have to think clearly about these three domains. We have to think clearly that they are different. Why? Because, of course, they have to communicate. Of course. When we have a patient with an acute problem, with a real psychiatric problem, he is likely to be stabilized, but sometimes he has residual symptoms. And these residual symptoms make him raise the question of disability, of inclusion, and of recovery. And we will have to propose collaboration with this gray zone to make possible to achieve a good mental health. So obviously, of course, we have collaborate. But these are like the three brands of a braid. The three brands are different, but they have to be all together to be solid and to propose something which works. Now, in practice, and I come to the end of my communication, in practice, how to plan the future of psychiatry. I guess we have to consider psychiatry in the future as in a post-evidence-based medicine, post-neuroscience era. Because evidence-based medicine, neuroscience are great indeed. They have provided huge progress, but they face limitation. Because of the overuse of statistics, we only consider always an average patient. And when you consider an average patient, you deny cultural diversity. If you consider the mind only through the brain, and because the brain is related to biology, then you will be tempted to overuse medication. And as I told you, there is a real risk today in our profession about overuse of medication. I have even heard a Canadian colleague that was saying that in 10 or 20 years, perhaps the overuse of stimulants and antipsychotics could be the major scandal, public health scandal of our profession. We have to be very careful about that. You know, this is so easy and so tempting to give a solution with a pill that sometimes, because we have no time, we are tempted to do that. But we have to be very careful about that. Sustainability, because when we do research to create new treatment, we don't care about money. We create optimum treatments. But in most countries, in most situations, this is not sustainable. And this is a personal point of view. I fear a little bit impoverishment of clinical knowledge and practice. So, how to deal with that? First, concerning denying of cultural diversity and temptation of over-prescribing medication, we have to struggle against ideologies and bunker mentality. 40 years ago, in our profession, people thought only with psychoanalysis. Nowadays, perhaps we think a little bit too much with statistics and neurobiology. And this is some kind of bunker mentality. And we can understand why, you know, because ideologies, whether it is for psychoanalysis or for neuroscience, are a defense mechanism for the psychiatrist or the psychologist. Your ideology about what is a thinking subject help you to think your patient, and it protects you against the reality that is you don't understand your patients in reality. You don't understand how work a family. This is too complex at the moment. We have no solution for that. And so we grasp an ideology and we use it to manage our treatment, our patient-professional relationship. And so because this is very helpful, we transform these ideologies, these theories, in ideologies, in dogma, in totem. And we have to struggle against that. And the good news is that our young colleagues are much less in difficulties than us about that. We have also to broaden the perspective of research and to use qualitative approaches that are indeed very useful in our domain. And I was very happy that there was a course on Monday here in IACAPAP about the use of qualitative studies. Concerning sustainability, we have to decide what are the core needs in each of our countries, because we have not the same income. And so we have to determine in each country which patient should be treated by psychiatry. This is a real important point, and we have not enough studies about that. We have not to hesitate to use health economy studies, because most of our treatment are cost effective. And if you live in a low income country, because sometimes there will be 1, 2, 3, 5 psychiatrists in the country, it will be very difficult to propose sustainable treatment. And here you can use the MHCAP from WHO. Perhaps you do not know MHCAP. MHCAP is a textbook, 300 pages. It is free, you can download it. And this is very interesting to read. This is some kind of algorithm that can help a non-physician to see the symptoms in patient and to propose a treatment that is evidence-based. So in a way, this is very interesting, and this is very interesting in high-income countries for students. In another way, we have to be very cautious with that, because in the introduction of MHCAP, the president of WHO wrote that there is a widely shared but mistaken idea that improvement in mental health, I'm sure she considers psychiatry and not mental health anyway, requires sophisticated and expensive technology and highly specialized staff. The reality is that of the mental, neurological, substance use conditions that result in high morbidity and mortality can be managed by non-specialist healthcare providers. I think this is not true. This is not true. And I wanted to be sure that it was not a corporatist attitude. I tried to think about that, but try to remember your 5 last patients. Try to remember them and to consider that the situation was simple. When you have to understand the relationships that happen in a family concerning the symptoms of a patient, and you can only deal with a patient when you consider his family and the interaction between symptoms and family and sister and parents, etc. And this is amazingly complex, and you have to be trained concerning that. And this is a high training, high-level training. And so imagine that this introduction is seen by the health insurance. And in fact, it has happened. They will say, okay, look at what say WHO. We don't need you. We can need with non-specialist healthcare worker. And it happens that in Great Britain, in France, this has already happened. So we have to be very cautious about the overuse of tools that can be helpful for low-income country, but not for the other country. Concerning mental health, we have to be clear. Mental health, this is well-being. As soon as you say mental health, you have to think in your mind, I am speaking about well-being. I am not speaking about depression or schizophrenia. Of course, I do not mean that psychologists, psychiatrists, even psychiatrists have nothing to do with mental health. We have to testify. We have to say that what we see presently with migrants, with intrafamilial violence, with wars, are not good for mental health, obviously, but they are not good also for the future of those that will become our patients in the future, because these are our risk factors. Okay, this is true, but we have also to stay apart, because these are political issues. And concerning the gray zone, it has to be consolidated. We have to conceptualize it in a much better way, because at the moment it is not clear what it is. And another important point is that much of the money that comes in the gray zone come in fact from health insurance or for the money that came before in psychiatry. And because, and this is good, because there is a lot of activism in the field of disability, and this is good. This is good, but it must be not to the detriment of psychiatric patients. Concerning the gray zone, we have to struggle against corporatism, because we have here in this area really to work together, and psychiatrists are not in the main position to do that. We have to involve parents and patients, like in obesity, like in type 2 diabetes. Nowadays, this is what we have to do, and there is room to be innovative indeed. Community management, self-parenting training, hyper-brief psychotherapies. I like the job of Jean-Nicolas Desplein, a Switzerland colleague, that developed 4-session psychodynamic treatments, and he did randomized control trial, and it works. And of course, connected health will be a major issue in this area. And this is my last slide. To conclude, yes, indeed, now we have data to consider that child and adolescent psychiatry is a major public health issue. Everybody knows that, we have data. And yes, indeed, our societies are undergoing considerable change. This is true. This is true, and we are scared for all these reasons about the future of our youth. But this leads that there is a confusion about what should be child and adolescent psychiatry. We have to acknowledge that mental health, subthreshold problem, disability, psychiatric disease are related to different culture, care, different histories, and epistemologies. They are different, but like brands of a braid, they have to be together to be solid and to propose the best for our patients and for our youth. And I thank you for your attention.